I'd like to dedicate this Devar Torah to the young adults at Kol Tzedek in my teen class, and in particular to the teens who shared this experience with me. Your immense compassion and curiosity give me hope for the Jewish future. It was a warm spring night in early May 2024. The siege in Gaza already felt endless, nearly 9 months in. Students and faculty were organizing on campuses across the country as part of a nationwide university divestment effort, including right in our very own West Philly at the University of Pennsylvania. I had been teaching a monthly teen class on politics and ethics. We'd been discussing the war in Gaza and studying the Torah of ceasefire all year. With the semester coming to an end, I decided to take them on a field trip to the encampment at Penn. It seemed like a timely opportunity for experiential education. I imagined it would be a quiet night on campus. I'd been invited to participate in an interfaith prayer service and thought that might be a nice experience to share with my students. I reached out to Molly Sand, who was finishing her freshman year at Penn and one of the student organizers of the encampment, not to mention one of my very first bat mitzvah students here at Kol Tzedek. And I asked if she might make some time to debrief the experience with my class after the prayer service was over. She was enthused. As we walked up and over the class of 1949 bridge, we could hear and see a rather large crowd. And we learned that at the last minute, the students had planned a rally. And in response, police arrived in equal numbers. I eyed the line of faith leaders, pastors, rabbis, imams, chaplains, my dearest friends and colleagues, wearing their assorted rainbow shawls and keffiyehs. They were standing between the speakers and a block of police in full riot gear, batons and shields at the ready. I waved to my colleagues on the periphery. But for fear of placing my students in harm's way, we hung back on the periphery of the crowd. I kept these young people close as we took in the sea of flags, posters, and t-shirts. We were surrounded by many familiar Kol Tzedek faces, including Dr. Raz Siegel, who was wrapping up his remarks as he passed the microphone to Dr. Nora Erica, who began to speak. And then, seemingly out of nowhere, a young Jewish student wearing a kippah and standing immediately to our right put on a pair of tefillin and began shouting the Shma over the din of the protest. At which point the crowd of many hundreds, including students, faculty, and faith leaders, began chanting Free Palestine over the din of the Shema. Our heads scanned back and forth as we found ourselves suspended in this political theater. The air was combustible. I was on guard. We had not signed liability waivers. One of the teens leaned over and gently whispered in my ear, "Is he just praying, or is he trying to be disruptive?" I could understand why it was hard to tell, and yet it was clear that he was trying to be disruptive. Now, mind you, I had personally taught every one of these young Jewish adults to say the Shema. I had taught them to internalize the words as an expression of our profound interconnection with all life. I had stood with every single one of them as they held the Torah and led the congregation in these very words at their respective b'nai mitzvah. And now, here we were on a field trip, hearing those very words being used to silence the speakers we had come to hear. When a quiet moment emerged, I gathered the students and we walked to a grassy knoll to debrief our experience with Molly. Everyone was a bit shaken. The teens asked thoughtful questions about the goals of the encampment, the organizing process. As we began to recount the experience of hearing the Shma, some of the teens shared how disorienting it was to hear the Shma, unsure if they should join in, or unsure if they should join in the chance to drown it out, unsure who their people were. It was not lost on me then or now, as I look around and see many of those same faces in the room, that this was a very formative experience for all of us. But at the time, I was not yet ready to share with my students that I too was unsure who my people were. But now, nearly 18 months later, nearly 2 full years into the siege in Gaza, 725 days since the Israeli hostages were taken captive, with the people of Gaza facing famine and extermination, with the encampments dismantled, the student organizers suspended, and academic freedom suppressed, now I am ready to share that the experience caused me to question my relationship to the wider Jewish community in a profound way. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. These 6 powerful words, sung to this Shabbos melody, are inseparable from the Jewish soul. They come directly out of the book of Deuteronomy, intended both to unify Jews and to point us to the oneness of all life. The Shema and her blessings are a moment of collective resonance in Shabbat services, invoked twice daily in morning and the evening, a lullaby for some sung before bed. They are the last words recited on our deathbed, and they will be our final call at the very end of Yom Kippur. Each week I watch as toddlers know to stop toddling and cover their eyes, taking in the feeling before they can even speak the words. For the poets and mystics among us, I will note that the Shema is in fact a haiku. One that is exceedingly, perhaps intentionally, perhaps impossibly hard to translate into English. Every word has many meanings, and there is no grammar to lean on. That night on campus was one of the only times in my life that I have heard the Shema and not instinctively joined in. As we talked with one of the campus organizers, we learned that interrupting the activities of the encampment by loudly chanting the Shema had actually become a regular tactic for the counter-protesters on campus. It quickly became clear that we were not the only ones disoriented and even disturbed by the experience. Apparently, the student organizers have spent long hours trying to decide how best to respond. Sometimes the crowd quiets until they finish. Sometimes they chant ceasefire now or free Palestine over the Hebrew din. It was clear that the Shema was successfully being used as a political tactic to position the encampment as anti-Jewish instead of just critical of the state of Israel. Sitting with my students, I too felt the pain of not knowing who my people are. And quite honestly, it has stayed with me all these months. Whether or not we feel ourselves individually to be in an existential spiritual crisis, collectively I feel we are. We are indeed living through what my teacher, Rabbi describes as a crash. To borrow a question from the title of Peter Beinart's most recent book, what does it mean to be Jewish after the destruction of Gaza? And what remains of our relationships to other Jews? I have this distinct memory from when I was a rabbinical student. It was Purim morning, probably 15 years ago. One of my teachers entered the Beit Midrash, the study hall, dressed in a black cloak, with a black hood draped over her head. She looked like a mashup between the Grim Reaper and Darth Vader. And on her back was a giant silver question mark, made of cardboard and spray paint. It was not until the very end of the celebration, until we couldn't tell the difference between good and evil, that she revealed to us that she was in fact dressed as Jewish Peoplehood. At once mystifying and mythic, the idea had become a major theme at Hebrew College. While our political and theological opinions varied greatly on the subject of Israel-Palestine and Zionism, the faculty posited that we should be able to agree, maybe even align, on the idea of Jewish peoplehood. If only we could define it, which we couldn't. The origins of the term Jewish peoplehood are surprisingly relevant to us as a Reconstructionist community. I typically would look back to classical rabbinic sources and Torah itself to understand a Jewish concept. So I did. And it turns out there is no biblical or rabbinic mention of the term Jewish peoplehood, or its closest Hebrew cognate, Am Yisrael, or really any comparable Jewish concept. To quote Rabbi Andy Kahn in a recent article, the idea of the Jewish people as a unified nation is a modern invention. Coined in the 1930s by the founder of Reconstructionist Judaism, Rabbi Mordechai Kaplan, along with the Reform rabbi and Zionist leader, Rabbi Stephen Wise. The idea of Jews as a collective with solidarities and responsibilities to each other, that is indeed ancient. But this very specific version of it, that imagines Jews as a people with specific state rights and privileges, in a similar way to how, for example, Polish nationalism imagined Poles as a people, that idea is relatively brand new. And it was articulated very specifically to make European-style nationalism make sense in an American context, to a Jewish audience, and specifically to encourage support for the state of Israel. In his book, Jewish Peoplehood, An American Innovation, Jewish Studies professor Noam Pianko explains, and here I'm quoting, Jewish peoplehood, the concept, enabled Zionism's conception of Jewish groupness to move from the margins to the mainstream of American Jewish life and thought. In such a notion of peoplehood, it probably did make a lot of sense in a post-Holocaust era, where everyone was trying to understand the borders of belonging in a hyper-nationalist world. A world where Jews were the recent targets of racialized discrimination and violence. It made sense to say that every one of us who wore, or would have been made to wear, a yellow star, they're one of us. They're my people. That we are bound together as a people, and therefore why not have the unique rights of a people, of a nation state? If we were going to be targeted for being Jews, perhaps we should understand and empower ourselves that way as well. And this led Kaplan to conceive of and effectively invent the notion of Jewish peoplehood. But the specific nationalist version of peoplehood also carried with it nationalism's worst pathologies. To at first legitimize, but ultimately homogenize and control an otherwise diverse population. Which has led us to this moment, where the entire Jewish institutional world claims that standing with Israel is a necessary expression of Jewish life. And to be honest, until this year, I thought when Kaplan coined Jewish peoplehood, he was simply translating the ancient phrase, Am Yisrael. But as it turns out, Am Yisrael never appears in Torah, it never appears in rabbinic literature, and the phrase actually originates not even as a spiritual concept, but as a song lyric, an anthem, one that I personally grew up singing full throttle in synagogue, in youth groups, and even once in a Zionist mosh pit. Am Yisrael Chai. That is where the phrase Am Yisrael comes from. And that is where Kaplan borrowed it from. That phrase was likely, that lyric was likely first coined in an early Zionist songbook in 1895, with sheet music set to many different tunes. At the time, it was an expression of solidarity, sung during and especially in the moments right after World War II, by survivors in the liberated camps. It originated as an anthem of survival, a rallying cry, a redemptive song. But it was not until the 1960s, when Shlomo Carlebach set it to music, that it became the bop we know it to be. And even then, it was created for the student movement in support of Soviet Jewry, as a slogan of solidarity among Jews, as Jewish refugees from the former Soviet Union took refuge around the world. When Carlebach wrote that tune, I imagine he too saw it as the rallying cry of the underdog, of displaced refugees. But in our time, its meaning greatly changes when it becomes the rallying cry of the most powerful military in the region. Following the Hamas attacks of October 7th, 2023, the Hasidic singer Benny Friedman released his own song called Am Yisrael Chai, which has become throughout Israel and throughout the Jewish world a wartime anthem. No longer a powerless people, the state of Israel has deployed Am Yisrael Chai to excite nationalist fervor in this endless siege. Now, it is not the case that when Kaplan looked out at the Jewish imagination and the Jewish lexicon, there were no relevant terms for describing Jewish collectivity in the biblical and rabbinic imagination. He had other options. In Torah, we have the idea of B'nai Yisrael. We are the children of Israel, used to describe the ancient Israelites in the desert. And perhaps even more aptly, we were an Erev Rav, a mixed multitude who left a narrow place together, seeking spiritual freedom from chattel slavery. It is true that we do see the word Am in Torah, but there are two important differences in its usage. First, it always describes God's relationship to us, as in, we are God's people, rather than describing our relationship to one another. And secondly, its usage always describes a spiritual relationship, not a political one. As in the melody that we will sing later tonight, Ki anu amecha, for we are your people. We are God's people, which is related but actually distinct from ourselves being inherently bound together as a people, and certainly quite different from being a nation state. This is not to say that the Torah doesn't want us to have deep care and concern and connection to one another, as B'nai Yisrael, or even as an Erev Rav, a mixed multitude. Rabbi Aryeh Bernstein explains, loving the Jewish people collectively may not exist as a classical Jewish concept, but certainly loving individual Jews does exist as a biblical and rabbinic concept. And it appears in the Torah reading we will read tomorrow afternoon. The heart of the Holiness Code, found in Leviticus 19, elucidates a list of spiritual instructions meant to create a more just society, and included among them is one of the most famous biblical teachings, Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, love your neighbor as yourself. The passage that teaching is nestled between uses a variety of words to describe our obligations to other people. Re'echa, achicha, amitecha, b'nei amecha. Your neighbor, your sibling, your people, the children of your people. The variety of the words inspire us to ask, who count as your people? Your kin, your neighbor? And in what ways are our obligations the same or different based on the nature of our relationship? These are the questions I've been asking myself all year. To whom are we obligated? And what do we owe them? Setting aside the nuance of these different terms, it is clear that we have an obligation to carefully relate to other human beings in general, and even Jews in particular. The context in Torah suggests the care includes that we should exhibit righteous behavior proactively, and that we are obligated to hold them accountable. This is summarized best in the Jewish concept, Kol Yisrael Aravim Ze Bazeh, most often translated as, all of Israel are responsible, one for another. Kol Yisrael may yet be the closest expression of Jewish collectivity, if not for the fact that it is immediately deconstructed into Ze Bazeh, one by one, making clear our responsibility lies in each individual relationship, not in a prescribed loyalty to the collective. In my own experience, one of the devastating consequences of living through this spiritual catastrophe is that I feel cut off from other Jews, from my own family members, my teachers, my colleagues, my longtime study partners. And I know I'm not alone in this. And the truth is that I expect it to get worse, not better. In a recent meeting with the new Vice President of Community Relationships at the Jewish Federation, I confronted him about the fact that because of Kol Tzedek's participation, the Federation pulled their name from the Center City Shavuot Tikkun that we have been part of creating every year. To which he responded, is Kol Tzedek an anti-Zionist community? To which I responded, I do personally identify as anti-Zionist, but no, Kol Tzedek as a congregation does not identify that way. Our members hold a range of views, and we welcome them all. What unites us is our shared values of democracy and self-determination for all people in Israel-Palestine, and our desperate calls for a ceasefire. And in response, he confirmed that indeed Kol Tzedek has and will continue to be disenfranchised from all Jewish Federation programming because of our views in Israel. It was a rather cordial and surprisingly candid interaction. It was stark. It was clarifying. It is not that we feel isolated. It is that we are isolated. I have sat with so many congregants, reaching out rather desperately, hanging on to the Jewish community and to their Jewish identities by a thread. From Philadelphia to Appalachia, Miami and New Zealand, the common theme among their concerns is a deep shame in being part of the Jewish people, given 2 years of genocide in Gaza. The shared sentiment is that Jewish institutional life has failed them. Even more so, it has betrayed them. They feel, we feel, there is no place for us in Jewish life, at day schools, at summer camps, at Shabbat services, if we cannot tolerate the regular invocation of Jewish nationalism. And quite honestly, the feeling is kind of mutual. Just last week, the rabbi at the synagogue I grew up in announced that the congregation was going to be bringing speakers on a range of opinions on Israel. And he wondered aloud to the entire internet, should that include anti-Zionists? Under which he posted, spoiler, the verdict is no. And now here I'm quoting. He writes, not even those of us whom he publicly acknowledges are well-mannered Jewish adults who went to Jewish summer camp and believe the values they learned compel them to be anti-Zionist. And this is the kicker. Not even the ones who he acknowledges were raised and educated right here at his very temple. At which point he may as well have tagged me. Except I no longer have Facebook. That's a different sermon. It's easy to laugh about it, but honestly, it was really sad. And Rabbi Mo wins the bet. I think this counts as a cry. To imagine my parents sitting in Rosh Hashanah services in a synagogue that I wouldn't be welcome in. All these years later, it is not just that I am questioning my relationship to the wider Jewish community. They too are questioning if there is a place for me. And it's heartbreaking. And here we see clearly that the ongoing Nakba of Palestinians, orchestrated by the State of Israel in the name of Jewish safety, has exposed the fallacy of Jewish peoplehood on all sides, fracturing the very Jews it claims to protect and unite, literally disconnecting me and many of us from the Jewish communities that raised us. I don't yet know if Kaplan would be proud that Jewish peoplehood has been enormously sticky. Sticky but also sour. Which is why that Purim costume has haunted me all these years later. Now here's the brutal truth. If you're thinking, well, maybe Judaism is the problem, I've already asked myself that question. The brutal truth is that there is no religion that has not been used to justify nationalism and genocide. Not Buddhism, not Hinduism, not Christianity, not Islam. I can understand why one would look at this truth and say, see, religion is the problem, and I wouldn't judge you for it. But me, I look at it, and I realize this is the way of human nature. This is what it means to pray among transgressors in the widest circle. The realization that Jews are as diverse and flawed as any other religious or ethnic group is actually humbling and healthy. Ironically, it is a fulfillment of Kaplan's other primary conviction, that we are not exceptional. We are not chosen people. We're just people, like everyone else on earth. We're not a particular threat, as Christian nationalism would suggest. We do not control the government or the media. We are not plotting to take over the world. Sadly, we don't even have space lasers. But the inverse is also true. We are not a light unto the nations, or the keeper of the most moral army on earth. We are not any one thing. We are just as susceptible to the dangers of racism and nationalism as anyone else on earth. We are witnessing in grave relief the collective humanity of the Jewish people. I must admit, it feels strange and counterintuitive to be so intentionally deconstructing our understanding of Jewish collectivity on the holiest day of the year, when our prayers instruct us specifically to gather as one collective spiritual entity, as an agudat achat. Especially because part of what I love about being Jewish, part of what I love about being a congregational rabbi, part of what I love about Yom Kippur, is the invitation to be part of and care for something larger than ourselves, to extend our circle of concern, to augment our self-interest, to widen our web of relationships. I'm not interested in being Jewish alone. I've thought to myself, if I lived in a monastery, I'd probably just be Buddhist. This is why I've devoted my life to building Jewish community. But needless to say, we find ourselves swimming upstream here. What comfort can I offer you? The longing to understand what binds Jews together is actually itself ancient. It's at least as old as the Talmud. A story is told in Masechet Brachot, in which the ancient rabbis, who of course invented tefillin, and arguably made the Shma the central prayer of Jewish tradition, they imagined that God too prays as we pray, and wraps tefillin as we do. So logically they asked, does God say the Shma? To which they figure out that wouldn't make sense, because the Shema contains the aspiration of God's oneness, which is actually what's inscribed on the parchment inside of our tefillin. And so then they ask, then what's on God's tefillin? To which Rav Chia bar Avin replies, God's tefillin contains the aspiration that the people Yisrael will be echad, will be one. Studying this text, I realized that the rabbis themselves were living through a time of rupture, perhaps not unlike our own. They were struggling with the same things so many of us were struggling with. What is our relationship to other Jews? What binds us to Babylonia, to Jerusalem, and beyond? Are we really still connected? The rabbis tell this story because they understand that Jewish peoplehood and the clarity of what it is that connects us is and has always been elusive, as it should be. It's aspirational. Even the Holy One aspires to know what it is. Over the past 18 months, I have developed a lot of compassion for the student who chanted beside us and chanted the Shema. I imagine that for him, chanting the Shema, for him, Judaism and Zionism were one and the same, inextricably linked. I imagine his disruptive Shma was a protest in which he was advocating his own authentic expression of Jewish identity. I certainly was taught that Jewish survival depends on the existence of the Jewish state. I imagine most of us raised in mainstream institutional life were taught the same. I imagine he might have feared for his own survival. But I also believe that early Zionist thinkers never could have imagined this moment, when Jewish nationalism would prove itself to be morally incompatible with Jewish values. And what's clear to me now is that unless we actively untease our spiritual tradition from this political ideology, Judaism will itself crumble. Judaism has survived a cascade of spiritual catastrophes. And this one is ours to shape. Judaism needs us as much as we need it. What connected us in the time of the rabbis and still connects us now is Torah. It's prayer. It's abundant acts of kindness. It's the celebration of holidays and the taste of your bubby's favorite recipes. It's teaching our children the deeply embedded values of B'Tselem Elohim and Tikkun Olam, honoring the dignity of every person and pursuing justice, while encouraging their questions and listening for their insights. What connects us then and connects us now is our understanding that love includes holding each other accountable. What connected us then and still connects us now is the celebration of new life at a bris, coming of age at a bat mitzvah, breaking the glass at a wedding. It's shoveling dirt to bury our dead, and somehow finding the strength to say Kaddish again and again and again. What binds us is so much older and so much more enduring than nationalism. I believe one of the unique opportunities and responsibilities of our generation, and of this community in particular, is to reclaim and recover a Judaism beyond nationalism, which is how it was for thousands of years. I don't yet know if it's possible to infuse the phrase Jewish peoplehood with new meaning, but I'm certainly open to trying. Or perhaps we need to release those words, to return to something older, like B'nai Yisrael. Or even better, allow our teens to come up with something altogether new. In trying to untangle the idea of Jewish peoplehood, I've come to believe that it is many truths and also a lie. Truth. Peoplehood is and has always been elusive. Truth. What binds us together as a people are shared languages, traditions, and spiritual practices. And the lie. That the ideal and ultimate manifestation of Jewish peoplehood is a political entity rather than a spiritual one. The thing that is everlasting, the thing that is worth preserving, is not the nationalist version of Jewish peoplehood that Kaplan and Wise conceived of, but rather the vastness of Jewish people. It's our spiritual traditions. It's our ability to question everything. It's our emphasis on tshuva, our dozens of languages, our earnest desire to make the world more whole. If in every recitation of the Shma, it's our task to realize the oneness of the Holy One, as elusive as it may be, then it's comforting to imagine that up above, in Yeshiva Shalmala, God is up there praying also for our wholeness, for our oneness, as elusive as that may be. Together in this new year, may we reclaim the joy and wisdom that has always been the heart of Jewish tradition. May we come to realize that the boundaries of our people are wider than we ever imagined. And may we merit to raise a generation of Jews empowered with the Torah of truth and justice. In the words of Marcia Falk, "Hear, O Israel, the divine abounds everywhere and swells in everything. The many are one." May it be so. Gemar Chatima Tova.